listening to the fantastic Cut to the Race podcast.
Hello, my name is Bruce McLaren, and you're listening to the Formula Nerds podcast.
Hello, I'm Rosanna Tennant, and you are listening to the incredible Cut to the Race podcast.
Hi, I'm Jordan King, and you're listening to the Formula Nerds podcast.
Hi, I'm Crofty. You're listening to the Cut to the Race podcast. It's lights out, and away we go!
Hello and welcome to the Cut to the Race podcast. Today on the show, we have a very, very special guest. Now, it's not someone that you hear on a lot of podcasts. It's not one of these people who do the rounds. It's a very, very special guest. But before I introduce her, we have Cal. How are you, Cal?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. Very keen to get some information out of this wonderful guest we have on today. I feel like there's going to be some very, very cool stories.
Indeed. We have Abby with us. Abby, how are you? Can you just remind me, Abby, what team is it that you're a fan of?
I'm very well, thank you, but I am a McLaren fan, so I'm particularly excited for today's show.
Funny that. And James, how are you, sir?
I'm very good. How are you, Ollie?
Yes, I'm great. Thank you for asking. And we do have a special guest, like I said. We have Amanda McLaren on the show. Amanda, how are you today over in New Zealand?
Look, I'm fantastically well. A little bit overawed by that amazing welcome, and I hope I can live up to the expectations. But it's just great to be on your podcast, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely no problem. And I'm going to admit failure. Now, I'm not someone who makes a mistake and then just hides it. Due to time differences, this was meant to happen yesterday, but I got time differences wrong, so we're here today. There is a 13-hour time difference between us, so it's 9 p.m. in the UK, and we're talking to Amanda it's 10 a.m. where you are, isn't it?
It's 10 a.m. It's a beautiful sunny day, not wanting to rub it in for those of you listening from sort of the cold northern hemisphere, but here in New Zealand, I've got the sea behind me, and the sun's out, and it's just beautiful. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, it being in Manchester, England, I do feel like the Northern Hemisphere, and it's about -1. So, yeah, you've just made me certainly feel jealous. But Amanda, for those who don't know who you are, this is a standard question we ask everyone. If you could describe yourself in one sentence, Amanda, who are you?
Well, in terms of the reason I'm on the podcast, I'm the daughter of Bruce McLaren, who founded the McLaren team in 1963.
Now, that sort of is literally just given me goosebumps there, Amanda. But what was your earliest memory then of? I mean, you're in a motorsport family, a car family, an automotive world. What was your earliest memory that you can recall of this world that you've been born into?
Well, to be honest, sort of, I grew up at an early age a little bit sort of blasé about the world that my mother and father were involved in the people who were family friends. I had no idea that other people had them up on their bedroom wall as their pin-up heroes, and that in actual fact, the names on the titles of the book that were in our bookshelf were actually the people that were coming to our house to visit mum and dad. Because back then, really, Formula One drivers were rivals on the track, but incredibly good friends off track, and, they socialised together, and my mother had wonderful dinner parties and so on. So I just grew up with these people as sort of, Uncle Jack Brabham and Uncle Graham Hill, and really had no idea. And yes, I went to the races, but, I actually, apparently my first word was horsey. And all through my life, I admit that I've preferred anything with 4 legs to 4 wheels. Although I am obviously very passionate about McLaren and the racing and the road cars, but horses were my passion. So I'd be in the pits at a motor race and be running around, jumping over piles of tyres, pretending to be a horse, which, God forbid that should happen now. But that's, just how motor racing has changed over the years. But if we fast forward and nobody do the math, I'm 10 years old. It's 1976. And a certain gentleman called James Hunt is driving for McLaren. And yet again, I had no idea that most of my school friends had him on their bedroom wall as their pin-up hero. I certainly did, but I thought, well, it's just because I knew about him because he drove for McLaren. So we're at the British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch, and there was that infamous first corner incident, red flag, everything comes to a stop. And the crowd gets wind that potentially James might not be allowed to restart. Well, the British fans went berserk, and there was slow hand clapping and stomping in the grandstands, and it was all going on. And I'm sitting there with my mother in the middle of all this. So anyway, long story short, the race started and off we went and everything was fine. But I go back to school the next day and I'm telling everybody about what had happened. And sort of just said, oh, when we talked to James after the race. And all these school friends kind of looked at me and their eyes came out on store. And they're like, wait, what? Hold on. You met James Hunt yesterday? And I'm like, yeah. So what? And they're like, you met James Hunt? And I'm like, yeah. And so they're like, how the heck did you manage to do that? And we were all very polite, those school children, so that was probably about to stop. And I'm like, well, he races the team my father founded. And then I realised at that point, that was all I knew. They started asking me questions and I didn't know the answers. So I went back home and I studied a scrapbook of the 76 years, the infamous battle between Nicky and James. And I started reading the magazines my mother used to get every month, like Road and Track and Motorsport and Motoring News. And I started reading the books. And unfortunately, by that point, so many of the family friends had been killed. Motor racing was incredibly dangerous through the 60s and 70s. But I was able to tap into my mother and the amazing life she'd had and all the things she'd seen as she traveled with my dad and get the stories from her. And that continued through until she died. She had a wonderful memory, could tell some lovely stories. But really, that's my kind of first, it was a big light bulb moment. It was a big wake-up call. And really was sort of my initiation into the world of Formula One. As I say, having, and I kick myself now for not sort of being able to make more use of talking to the people that we knew, but I was blissfully unaware.
Obviously, your father, Bruce, was an incredible presence in the world of motorsport, formed McLaren Racing, and he's one of the people I personally wish we could have in this era of motorsport. Could you ever imagine, back when you were a 10-year-old girl stood at that 1976 Brands Hatch Grand Prix, that McLaren would, one, be where it is now, and two, not only competing in Formula One, but competing in IndyCar, Extreme E, esports as well, going into 2022? And do you think that, if your dad was still alive today, that he would have actually, guided the sort of the company in that direction? Or do you think he would have steered straight onto F1 and only F1?
Great question. Dad founded Bruce McLaren Motor Racing in 1963. And while his ultimate goal was Formula One, every racing driver really, their ultimate goal would be Formula One, I think. He started off in sports cars because that was an easier thing to do. And also with the Can-Am series starting up in the USA, prize money was very good. And the thinking was if they did reasonably well in that, they would get money to fund the fledgling Formula One team, because back in those days, the sponsorship was a tyre or some lubricant or fuel for the car or some brake discs or pads or something. So, the money was needed to, pay the rent on the garage and pay the staff wages. So money was needed. So Dad got very into sports cars. And obviously, I mean, the Can-Am story is just what a success, 100% record of wins in 1969, just incredible. But, he was doing that. And then he was building Formula 2 cars, he was building Formula 1 cars, he was building Formula 5000 or Formula Libre cars, he was building Indy cars. And because he also then wanted to get into Group 4 sports car racing and raced at Le Mans, as he had done back in 66 and other years, but obviously winning in 66 with the Ford, he wanted to race at Le Mans in a car of his own design and build. And so he was planning to do that and had actually built a road car because that was the rules at the time. And he was planning to build road cars as well. So if you fast forward to what McLaren are doing today, most of the above, and also just integrating some of the newer technologies and things, so the Extreme and also the Shadow series with the online. I think Dad would have gone down that road because he loved just building race cars. And again, back then, most drivers drove across the genre of racing rather than just pick the sort of one and progress up through the ladder. So one of the most common questions I get asked is, what would your dad think of McLaren today? Would it be proud? And I wouldn't have gone back to work for them if I didn't believe he would. And I think because of what they're doing and how they're doing it, and yes, they've had a few lean years, that happens to all teams. But, I think Dad would love the fact that they are back in sports cars. They are back at Indy. And they are doing all these things. And also to encourage the younger fans in, which is so incredibly important in motor racing, especially in Formula One, because without them, we haven't got a future. So I think, Dad would have gone down continued down the road he was going to continue to make the team bigger and stronger and diversified. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good to know, because like the anecdote you used there of him being in absolutely everything he could be involved in, it sort of feels like McLaren are trying to replicate that now almost, and that's really good to see that they're sticking with your father's roots in a way. So yeah, I'm really happy that he was like that, and they're trying to now be the same. That's brilliant.
You said earlier, Amanda, that your passion was more for horses rather than motorsport and things with four legs rather than four wheels. But as the daughter of Bruce McLaren and having a grandfather involved in motorsport as well, was there any kind of pressure growing up for you to be in motorsport and practically pursue that industry as a career?
No, there wasn't. I went to a very traditional all-girls school and had a very classic education. Learned Latin, which is incredibly useful. Not. Engineering wasn't a word I ever heard at school. And I'm pleased to say I went and visited the school recently, and the opportunities available to the girls there are just amazing. And the woodworking thing they've got, the engineering department, they can do all that, but it was still very much a sort of, it was all very sexist back in those days. So I grew up not really knowing what I wanted to do, and went to one of those careers advice seminars when I was doing my O-levels, which for those of you now speak GCSEs or whatever they might be called. But 15 years old. And I was told I could either be a nurse, a police woman, or a teacher. Well, I'm really not very child friendly. They have to have four legs. So I wasn't going to be a teacher. I would love to have been a mounted police woman and ride horses all day and be paid to do that. However, I wasn't tall enough to meet the criteria at that time. So I couldn't be a policewoman. So what was open to me was nursing. And I'd always been vaguely interested. I'd always sort of watched the hospital soaps on TV. And so long story short, I go and do my nursing training at the Guy's Hospital in London. And I became later very much attracted to theatre nursing. It's quite technical. And I got drawn more and more and more into the anaesthetic assistant side of things and the machines. And subsequently, I got very much into sort of education and teaching resuscitation and how to use defibrillators and how to use ventilators, and became involved with the reps and buying new equipment and troubleshooting and going to various wards and departments when there was a trauma happening or a resus happening, and being the one that operated all the machines. So I think if you think back to Dad, he was a driver, but also very much an engineer. And so I think I really did inherit that love of engineering and how things work. And it would have been, had I been a boy, possibly a route I would have gone down in a avenue that I would have explored. However, put me on a racetrack. I have never wanted to be, and I've only done it a couple of times, and I really didn't enjoy it. Being on a grid with 15, 20, 30 other people around you, the red mist is rising, the flag drops, and everybody wants to be first out of the first corner. So I would tend to pull over, let them go past, let them do half a lap, and then go and enjoy the drive. I love driving. I love cars, but I'm not particularly competitive in terms of beating other people. The only person I want to beat and improve on is myself. And I just, I've had the opportunity to drive a lot of the McLaren road cars over the last few years, and they are just superb pieces of machinery. But, I don't want to go 200 miles an hour. They all can, but I don't really particularly want to. But, just being able to go around the corner a little bit quicker than in your average family car or something like that, it is what excites me. But also what goes on under the skin of those cars. They're beautiful to look at, but the engineering and the design philosophy and that link back to nature and the things I'm interested in, the animals, that's the side of it that really intrigues me. I'll scream at the telly when Formula One's on or Indy or whatever, but I've never really wanted to be a part of it. And my mother always sort of encouraged me to do what I felt best for me. Sometimes she did raise her eyebrows and shake her head, but subsequently my stepfather was also very instrumental in sort of honing my career and encouraging me to sort of pursue the avenues of nursing. And then I did a Master's of Nursing Leadership and got into the things that really interested me. And he was very much about, you need to do something that you enjoy doing because work is a big part of your life. And I was never sort of, my mother, obviously, when my father was killed, terrible time for her. But she was never bitter about motor racing. She was really McLaren's #1 fan until the day she died. She called everybody there, regardless of whether they'd worked with my father or not, her boys, even if they just joined 6 months ago. They were her boys. And yes, she was very passionate about it, but I never had any pressure on me to follow in sort of Dad's footsteps or get on the track. For which, I'm very grateful. So I know a lot of people who've been pushed into a career by their parents. Not pleasant, and something I certainly am very pleased it didn't happen to me.
It's fascinating to see that the parallels still come through, though, like you say, with the technical side of things and being drawn into the ventilators. And you must have been really satisfied to see when at the start of the pandemic and the F1 teams all rallied around to help with the ventilators when they were being brought in.
Absolutely. I mean, an incredible thing to do. And funnily enough, we were on a cruise ship at the time that the pandemic hit. And halfway around a world cruise, we just got to Australia when all the ports started shutting down, which, long story short, meant that we ended up 33 days at sea without setting foot on land. And they couldn't get any new entertainers onto the ship. So they started asking the passengers if they could do a presentation. And of course, through my career as a nurse and then with McLaren, presenting was kind of half our job. And my husband often sort of joined me, and we did kind of Q&A. And he'd ask the questions and I'd give the answers. And we happened to have a presentation on his laptop, which we said, okay, we could kind of do this. So we left it until the very end of the cruise because we really didn't want to be back in work mode because this was our holiday. And I will get to the point of the story about Fred later. So we left it till the end because as soon as you sort of open your mouth and people know who you are, what you do, you get barraged with questions. So, my husband's sort of banned from wearing the T-shirt when we're on holiday, and I'm just Amanda and he's Stephen Donnell, and they assume I'm Amanda Donnell, and that's fantastic. So we're doing this presentation, and we go through, the history and dad, and we go through F1, and we go through the road cars, and then we talk about the ventilator, and it got the biggest round of applause of any presentation and anything that had been said up to that point. And I think people really appreciated the fact that, the Formula One teams, while they couldn't race, were doing something that people thought was very worthwhile. And there is a section of the public that still think that, motor racing is boring, cars go round and round, and Formula One's an exorbitant waste of money. But if you look at, and McLaren Applied Technologies are doing it, Williams are doing it, other teams are doing it, taking the learning and what they're doing in Formula One and putting it into affecting our everyday lives. And the ventilator, whether you're moving, or as a designer or an engineer, you're moving a liquid or a gas or something from A to B in a car or in a ventilator, principles are the same. So, yeah, I was delighted to see that McLaren were doing that. Great way to help. And at McLaren Technology Centre, one of the ventilators is on display in among all of the history and the heritage and the cars and things on the boulevard. Because I think, McLaren are proud of what they did, and justifiably so. So, yeah, absolutely good on them.
I mean, it's absolutely incredible that, a sport that has been known for hemorrhaging money, spending way too much money, being too glamorous, has actually turned out to be something that has, it's changed things for the better. And I, for one, I was really proud to see that when it started to come out in the newspaper, that our beloved teams, and, McLaren were obviously a massive part of this, but it was our sport that was championing this and putting their resources to good measure. Now, Amanda, I'm just going to throw it back to you again for a minute, because obviously we've done a little bit of research here for this podcast. When I was Googling and doing some online research, I found your life in cars. So what I want to do is just run this through for our listeners, because you would think that Amanda McLaren has driven McLarens her whole life. You would think that. But Amanda, is that the case?
No, it's absolutely not. There is a common misconception that, I'm a shareholder of McLaren, I'm on the board of directors, and I have an F1 and a P1 in the garage. I mean, that would be lovely, but, I'd be terrified to take it out. But so, no.
So this is what I just loved. This is what I loved it really says a lot about you, which is what I found so interesting, is your life with cars starts, correct me if I'm wrong here, this is all I've just found on the internet, which is, not the source of truth always. But 1983, you begin with a Volkswagen Beetle.
I did. So
what a car. I mean, I've got absolutely nothing wrong with that.
It was just awesome. I passed the driving test, and my stepfather was going to buy me a car. So I'd always loved Beetles. I don't know whether it was a shape or they were so cute, and I still love them to this day. So stepfather and I go hunting, and we come across bright orange Beetle, and then I'm in love, and my stepfather despises it because I think he's trying to sort of become a good stepdad, and I mean, he was fantastic, but he buys me this Beetle. And I have to say, at that point, I didn't know a lot about cars, and my stepfather really knew not a lot at all, probably even less than me. And she had an 1800 camper engine in the back. She had twin Weber carbs. She had a Kobe exhaust, and this thing could go. And she was also the loudest thing on the planet. And she backfired all the time. So I called her Frida after the blue Peter Tortoise. And for those of you who are a bit young or on the wrong side of the planet, Blue Peter, it was a kids program when I was a kid, and it's still going today. But part of the thing was all the presenters had an animal. So there was a cat and a dog and a pony and a tortoise. And the tortoise was called Frida. So Beetle looked like a tortoise, so I called her Frida. And that soon got replaced by Farty because of the noise she made. And everybody grew to know her and love her because she was sort of unrecognisable. But the downside was, I couldn't keep back home a little bit late because my mum could hear her coming from about a mile and a half down the road because she just sat by and made horrendous noise. But she was just the most fun car. She gave me my freedom, my independence. I was working 2 jobs at the time because she guzzled gas. But I drove all over the south of England in her. My string of boyfriends at the time played in sort of punk bands, and that was sort of my passion back then as well. And so, yeah, this car was just amazing. And yeah, I have a picture of her. My stepfather actually got the Kiwi logo from Dad's original symbol made and put on the side of the car in light grey, dark grey, and then black. So she had 3 Kiwis and kind of a streak coming out the back. And yeah, it was just a fab car. I'll try and find a photo and send it to you.
Yeah, please do. As you said, 1983, going up to punk concerts in your Beetle. We've got a BMW 5 Series in there. We've got a few Toyotas, including an MR2. But talk to me about the Igo. Is that outside the house now?
So no, it's not. So that was in England. And we're now in New Zealand, so I've actually got a Yaris, and my husband's got the RAV4, and you may see a bit of a Toyota theme emerging. So I was born in England. I came out to New Zealand on a family holiday in 1989. I thought, I'll stay for 6 months. It became 6 years, became 16 years, became 26 years. And then we went back to England for a while to work at McLaren's, and now we're back in New Zealand. But on the farm that we had a little Kaneka lifestyle block in New Zealand. We had a Toyota Hilux, and they're impossible to kill, and certainly on Top Gear they tried to do that, and they're just the most fantastic wagon for sort of farm life. So we had that, and I had a little MR2, which was just, next best thing. If you can't afford a McLaren, get a little mid-engined MR2 because they're beautifully balanced. They're fantastic to drive, and I had so much fun in it. But yeah, just like any low-slung sports car, hard to get in and out of as you get older. But Chris Amon and Dad won Le Mans together in 1966. Chris Amon was always a big fan of Toyota and actually was a Toyota ambassador here in New Zealand. And again, whether it be the links or just experiences we've had, we've always loved Toyotas. So we get to England and we're working at the McLaren Technology Centre. And who wouldn't want to do that? The most incredible place until you try to park your car. In the MTC was built when there were about 600 odd people working in Formula One, because really that's all it was. And then Applied Technologies comes along and McLaren Automotive comes along, and the workforce expands to pre-COVID, over 3,000 people. And MTC is built on greenbelt land, and we kind of just scrape another concrete pad for another car park. And so car parking is the biggest nightmare, and they tried all sorts to try and resolve it, and they're doing their best, but it is still incredibly difficult. There's also a lot of traffic jams and commuter traffic in the UK. So I needed something that was easy to drive, so an automatic. I needed something that was small, so I could park it at MTC. And I needed something that I could put the seats down and chuck a bag of horse feed in the back. So what was the smallest 5-door automatic on the market at the time? The Toyota Aygo. Now, bless its cotton socks, it was a great little car, and Toyota reliability, she never let me down, but she couldn't pull the skin off a rice pudding. It was a great little city car, but don't take it on the motorway. It takes you about 3 days to sort of get up to 70 and then pull out fast. And so I have to say, she was brilliant for the purpose she was bought for. But out here in New Zealand, there's a little bit less traffic. The roads are a bit sort of more open and a little freer. And the Yaris is just fantastic. I'm loving that. But yeah, we are a Toyota family. Next best thing to a McLaren.
Yeah. So you mentioned your dad and Chris Amon winning Le Mans. Now there was the recent film about Le Mans and the battle between Ford and Ferrari. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Was it a decent representation?
Yes and no. I have seen it. I think it's the difference between a documentary, which sort of tells the story as was, and Hollywood, where you need a protagonist and antagonist, and you need a dramatic arc, and you need to keep the audience engaged and rooting for the good guy and against the bad guy, whoever the bad guy may be. So, and depending again where in the planet you are, the film had 2 different names. I think Le Mans 66 or Ford versus Ferrari. It was very much sort of 10 miles versus Ford, which was obviously a small part of the 66 Le Mans story. But the fact that Dad did an awful lot of development on that car for for Ford to get it to where it was, to be able to be 1, 2, 3 at that race. And he and Chris actually won it. It was really rather skipped over in the story. I can understand it from a film director's point of view and from Hollywood's point of view, but as an accurate representation of that race, no, it didn't accurately portray the story.
And how about Rush?
Rush, I think, was probably a little closer to being accurate. Although, again, they sort of made James the hero and Nicky perhaps a little bit worse than he was in real life. But I think, I think they certainly got it a little closer in the person that won the race, and the person that won the championship rather than with Ford versus Ferrari or Le Mans, where that was really glossed over. And yes, I really did enjoy the film Rush, and certainly a good synopsis of that year. Yeah.
Okay, so while we're on the subject of F1 again, I'm going to ask you a bit of a personal question. Out of all of the drivers who have driven for McLaren, what would your dream pairing be? If you could bring anyone back going into 2022, what would your dream pairing be? And you can say your dad if you want to. I'll let you have it.
I will, and it's the same answer that I recently tweeted, which sort of got a bit of a frenzy going. It would be my dad and Ayrton. And the reason for that, my dad wasn't the fastest driver out there, but he was a great test driver and certainly knew how to design and build cars. He could also motivate the people around him. And back in the days before we had sort of really good leadership theories and everybody goes on the course and learns all this, he led that team to all the victories that they had through Can-Am and then into Formula One and Indy, to the extent where Howden Ganley, a New Zealander who was one of his early mechanics and later became a very, very good family friend, said that if Bruce had said, right men, and Howden says Bruce always put us men, because I think all the mechanics at that point were, right men, today we're going to march out into the desert and build a brick wall. Every single one of them would have done it without question. And that just, I'm so in awe of that, in that somebody could instill so much passion and motivation, but the team believed in him so much that they would do that. So the ideal pairing, I mean, Ayrton, very much the favourite, obviously one of the greatest Formula One drivers ever, some incredible history with McLaren. And I think, you know, if you want to go out there and win a race, you put him in a well-designed car, and you'd have an amazing team. And Dad maybe, you know, testing the cars, different setups on practice days and things, and then going out there and just killing it. It's it would be an interesting combination, and I'd love to just hear them talk. I think Dad would obviously, the sort of cars that Ayrton drove, we were just getting into the really technical times in Formula One, and you know, paddle shifts and getting rid of your clutch and your third pedal, not your clutch, but your third pedal, and it's just getting much more sort of automatic. But I think Dad would have understood all that. You know, he was very, very shrewd when it came to aerodynamics, car design, engineering, and what made a car faster or not. Hence the success in the Can-Am series. But it would be a really interesting pairing. Any two drivers in the world so I picked two McLaren drivers. Any two drivers, that would be, I think, an impossible question, because and it's this constant thing we have at the moment. Who was the best Formula One driver ever? And I think it's an impossible question to answer, because you're comparing an apple with an orange with a banana, because the cars were different, the circuits were different, everything was different. And so, you know, Ascari, Fangio, Jim Clark, Ayrton, Lewis, who's the best? Impossible to answer. So I really don't know. Outside of McLaren, which two drivers I'd pick?
That's a fair answer. And do you know what? You don't even need to think about the two drivers outside of McLaren, because I think the pairing you chose is absolutely fantastic. But following up, because, you know, Ayrton Senna, what a driver he was, and obviously such a tragedy with his life being cut short in the way it was. Do you think, this is probably another impossible question for you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think that if he'd have carried on, that there would even be a debate on who the best driver ever was? Because in my opinion, if he'd have carried on, there would be no question. It would be him.
I would agree. I think, had that awful tragedy not happened, And I do agree with Murray Walker when he says, the darkest day in Formula One history. It just where he would have gone and how many more races he would have won, how many more championships. But yeah, in terms of just, he had the technical skill and ability, but he seemed to have something, and other people talk about it. It seems to be something almost very hard to put a name to or to describe, where, drivers talk about becoming one with the car or getting in the zone or just, but Ayrton, with his sort of spiritual connection and just was really out there on his own, quite spectacular. And yeah, it would have been wonderful to see where he could have gone and what he did with his career.
You said you had an MA in nursing leadership, and in the current day and age, there's more and more female fans of motorsport, and people having an interest in it, and women working in the industry and that. You said, I believe in an interview, that with your nursing, it helps you understand stereotypes and gender roles. Do you think that women are overcoming these stereotypes in motorsport, in the industry? And are you excited about the future that women have in motorsport as well?
Well, yes, just to touch on the nursing stereotype. You think of a nurse, you think of a female. If a male says, I'm a nurse, sadly, is an automatic assumption that he's gay. Male straight nurses, there are a lot of them, and they're fantastic. But there is that stereotype that the men are the doctors and the women are the nurses. Flip that completely on its head, and you get into motorsport, and they're all men. Gradually seeing that change, and I have to give a huge shout out to Emma Gilmore for becoming McLaren's first female driver in our Extreme E series, and that series has also got McLaren's first female race director, so not race director, but engineer. So absolutely fantastic. However, it is still very much a male-dominated sport. We are slowly chipping away, and I'm really pleased to see that. I think it will take a long time before the scales balance, just because sheer weight of numbers at the moment. But I believe that it's the sort of job that women can do just as well, especially in the design and engineering side of things. Certainly in McLaren, a lot of our designers and engineers are female, and we're seeing more female drivers come through, but possibly not as many as we would need. But yes, it is good to see that women are getting a chance. They're able, through their education, to learn exactly the same as what the boys and then the young men want to do, and to step into the careers that the men want to do. But I think, I always believe that you should be employed because of your skill and not because of your gender. But I think it's also up to us women to see that these opportunities are available to us, and that's what you want to do. Grab it with both hands and go for it. In part of my role with McLaren was to take young students, university graduates and so on, through the McLaren Technology Centre and the McLaren Production Centre. And especially when you got to the McLaren Production Centre, people sort of imagine that where you build a Formula One car and they've heard it on the social media, or they've seen it on TV as kind of a pretty clean environment. But they don't think that about building road cars. And when they go and see McLaren Technology Centre, McLaren Production Centre, where McLaren Automotive built their road cars, they see a much, much bigger version of the Formula One workshop where we build our Formula One cars. Yeah, the white tiles, the white walls, everything laid out precisely. Nothing for you to trip over, and no mess, no dirt, no oil on the floor, no grubby calendars on the wall and things. like that. And they're surprised and they're quite shocked. And then they're quite delighted in that, I can see myself working there. It's not some grubby workshop at the back of, someone's garage anymore. It is, a lovely environment. And, that's fantastic that women are seeing that. However, I also know a lot of women who are more than happy to get down in the dirt, get under their 4x4 and sort it out and, take it cross country at the weekend and bring it back covered in mud and with all sorts. And but again, once upon a time, we had to be all clean and pristine and I've got no nails to talk of. My hair's always a mess. I scrub myself up when we go out and I have to do a presentation or speak on behalf of the company or my dad. But the rest of the time, I'm with my horse and I'm knee deep in it. And there isn't the expectation that women are sort of change the kitchen sink at home, looking lovely and having the meal served when you get home. So we've really broken a lot of those gender stereotypes, certainly in the developed world. But more to be done. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, we had an incredible guest on our podcast a while ago by the name of Ella Podmore, who I'm sure you're aware of. And what a girl! I mean, if you don't fall in love with her just by talking to her, then something's wrong with you. Her mannerisms and her passion for what she does for McLaren and the way that she's inspiring others. And when we released the podcast, there were hundreds of people that emailed us saying how inspirational they found it. And some of the stories that Ella told us about the lengths they go to find a certain material for a certain part on a McLaren. And even for some customers, they will find a unique part to put on a McLaren. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So certainly what you've said rings true. Now, Amanda, we've had a couple of questions come in from our fans. We obviously said we were having a chat with you. So I've got two that I'm going to ask you. Ian Fowley asked us, I would love to know Amanda's thoughts on New Zealand's young drivers trying to get into F1.
Great question. With the exception really of Brendan Hartley in what was it, 2017, we haven't had many New Zealand drivers in Formula One recently. I think back in Dad's day, your seat in Formula One was based on your talent and how many races you were winning. There was also the drivers, then the Driver to Europe Scholarship, which my dad was the inaugural winner of, and Denny Helm and others came across subsequently. Today, I think, you need to come up through the ranks, whether it be sort of through karting, Formula 2, into Formula 1, or in New Zealand, who we've got the Toyota Racing Series and people like the Giltrap family really helping with young drivers to come up through that. I think you've obviously got to have a reasonable level of skill, some obviously more than others. However, I think to get a Formula One seat today, you've got to have a rich relative. And I think that's sort of just a reflection of how incredibly expensive the sport has become in that I use the term sport, but it's not. It's a multi-million-dollar business and industry. And I think, without that money, it would be incredibly difficult, very sadly, for a young New Zealand driver to get a good seat in Formula One. However, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. And we've seen some of them, have a bit of a test session or go through Ferrari or Red Bull's young driver programs. So, there is a chance. And of course, I would love to see a young New Zealand driver in a Formula One car. It would be a division of loyalties for me because I have a foot in both camps. I was born in the UK, but I am very much a New Zealander as well. I have dual nationality, 2 passports. And before before Aaron McLaren SP came along, we always screamed for Scott Dixon when we were at the Indy Series or watching the races. So yeah, I would just love to see a young New Zealander in Formula One, but it's not easy. Not easy.
Okay. So, Ian Fowley, there's your answer. And the second one we've got is from Lee Gambles. Now, this is relating to F1 this year. He said, do you think McLaren will be hard to beat this year with the Mercedes engine and having the facilities that they have to hand? Now, just to add something to that, we all think the same. So, Amanda, are McLaren going to be a force to be reckoned with this year?
Oh, my goodness, what a question. Of course, I want to say absolutely yes. But I think that there's been so many, technical changes to the cars this season. It's very much a blank slate, and we're sort of starting again. So, we've got two incredible drivers. Young Lando has shown that, he's very capable of winning, almost, but not quite last year, of course. But, he's got the speed and the talent. Danny Rick, last year's car really didn't suit him. However, despite that, he still got on the podium at Monza. So, again, we've got the driver capability. Will it be more of a level playing field with the cost caps and so on? All the changes to the aero, the closer racing, and all the rest of it. It's going to be so interesting, so exciting. I can't wait to see it. Roll around that first race. But will McLaren be up there? Gosh, I hope so. I really do hope so. Yeah, they deserve it. They've worked so hard over the last few years. Zach and Andreas have done an incredible job to build that team back up from, last to podiums last year and fourth in constructors. Just fantastic. And I would dearly love to see them, back on the podium and more wins and yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, I can see it. Amanda, I can see it.
In 2022, who do you think will be the best driver out of Lando and Daniel? Who do you think will get the most podiums and do well in most races?
Oh. That is a really, really, really hard question. Based on last year, I can't answer it in one word.
All right, we'll give you one paragraph.
Oh my goodness. Based on last year, you'd have to say Lando. Based on previous experience, it would be Danny. And it really is a matter of and we saw it very much last year, who clicked with the car. And that remains to be seen. So, impossible question to answer. And I'm not going to say because I don't want people to say, Amanda said it would be so-and-so, and it's not. And I'm not going to answer that one.
We're not those guys, don't worry.
Great question, though. I love it, but it hasn't got an answer.
No, there is one that you could probably answer in one word, hopefully. Should a McLaren be papaya, white, or silver?
Papaya.
There you go.
Love it. Straight to the point. Now, Amanda, I have a very, very special treat for you. Probably isn't as glamorous as what you think it is, actually. I'll probably build that up a little bit too much. But, we've had, every time we have a very special guest on the show, I like to bring out a segment called the Motorsport Time Machine. Now, basically, here's what you have to do. You can go anywhere in time to any motorsport and you can do whatever you want. So, for example, Louise Goodman went back to the 70s and she partied with James Hunt. David Croft went back to the first ever F1 race. So if you could go anywhere in the motorsport world at any point in time, where would you go and what would you be doing?
Ooh, I'd go back to Monaco in 1962 when my dad won.
Wow. You know what? That is the fastest answer we've ever had to that question. So many people go, I'm not sure, I don't know, but that straight, I love that. You knew straight away. It's as if you knew I was going to ask that. That's brilliant.
I didn't know, but the stories my mother tells of that race and what happened sort of before and after, it would just be, second probably only to partying with James. But yeah, it was just, I mean, Monaco is glamorous. Back then, it was one huge party for the drivers, but especially the spouses. You know, Dad and Mum went to the palace, had a cocktail party with the Rainiers. There's an amazing story around that. But yeah, just the people she met, and of course, Dad winning there. I mean, how amazing! So yeah, that would be my story.
So, would you want to be stood with your mother watching the race and talking with all these people, or would you know, the time machine's a very special machine, and for this personal, dream, I would happily build a sidecar for your dad's car and let you go around with him for the victory. Now, would you choose to be in the car with your dad, or would you be stood with your mother?
Oh my goodness. I think I'd be terrified being in a sidecar, especially with how narrow Monaco is, and there wouldn't be room. So yeah, I think with Mum watching and her clutching my hand and we'd be drinking volumes of wine or champagne just to get us through the race, and then I think just being with her and Dad when he gets out of the cockpit and that would be an incredible moment. So yeah, I think I'd probably. And yeah, the anticipation of watching with Mum and just sort of hanging on every lap and every corner and every moment, and then it all sort of, yeah.
Brilliant. That's probably my favourite answer to that question.
Cal, you say that every race. Every race.
No, but I mean
every
it
podcast. But to be fair, the quality of answers just keep going up. So yes, I'm with you there. Amanda, I wish I could sit here and talk to you for the rest of the evening until it is New Zealand time. As you said, New Zealand is ahead of us in more ways than one. So I do wish we could sit and talk all night, but it has been really, really fascinating to hear what you've told us. And I thank you so much for coming on this show. I know I don't speak for myself. I speak for our panel here and our listeners. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you've had a good time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Some great questions. Really lovely talking to you. And yeah, thank you for inviting me.
And as you said, the weather is beautiful outside, so I'm not going to keep you for it anymore. I can see the beach.
I'll just make you really, really jealous and just show you what.
Oh, wow.
Hang on.
I could make you really jealous and show you the ice outside. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that. So the place where we're living actually belongs to Denny Holmes' daughter and son-in-law, because we're building a house and they haven't even started digging yet to build the house. So yeah, this is our home for probably the next year or so. So yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
It could be worse. Could definitely be worse, couldn't it?
Could be an awful lot worse. Yeah, there it is in the background. Yeah.
Well, Amanda, I know when I'm going to purchase my McLaren, who I'm taking with me. So I will see you at the Technology Centre.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much. Will do. We'll keep